Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. On today's episode of Thinking in English, I'm going to answer some of your questions. Check out the Thinking in English blog for the full transcript of today's episode, and also head over to my Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast, for more excellent vocabulary content. Here is today's episode. Last week on Instagram, I put out a story asking for some of your questions. Quite a few of the responses were just really nice messages saying thank you for making these episodes, which I really appreciate. And it makes me even more motivated to continue with the podcast. As well as all of the lovely messages, I received a whole bunch of questions. I'll answer the first 8 or so questions today, and I'll record another episode in a few weeks or months, including the questions I didn't have time to answer. Make sure you're following the Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast, because that is where I ask for questions. I also post regularly, both about English and about my life in general. I've also started to recently experiment with making some Instagram reels, which are a little bit like TikTok style videos. And you might enjoy some of them. And if you listen on Spotify, you've probably noticed a few changes with the platform over the last few months. I can now ask questions, receive your answers to those questions, and set polls on Spotify. Actually, one or two of the questions I'll answer in this episode came from Spotify. Spotify also just allowed you to rate podcasts. So please leave me a 5-star rating on Spotify. I'd love you all forever, and it really helps to attract new listeners and might improve my chances of entering the Spotify charts. And of course, if you use Apple Podcasts, please rate me and leave me a review over there. Okay, so that's enough of me begging you all to like, rate, and follow me. Now I'll answer your questions. The first question comes from Instagram user Svetau_0. Now, I really apologize. I'm going to say all of these Instagram usernames wrong. They asked, how long have you been living in the UK? Well, the interesting thing is, I don't live in the UK. However, as Svetau_0 follows my Instagram page and listens to the episodes, I'm sure they already know that. And I guess they just mistyped. So let me explain the different places I've lived. For the first 21 years of my life, I lived in England. I grew up in a small village in the center of the country, surrounded by beautiful fields, lots of sheep, and many boring old people. Then I moved to the city of Nottingham for university. In 2016, I left England to take up a job as an English teacher on the island of Shikoku in southwest Japan. I didn't know anything about Japan, Japanese culture, or Japanese language. I was just looking for a job, and Japan offered a good salary and high job security. After 2 years in Japan, I returned to the UK for further study. I enrolled in a master's program in London and I completed it in the summer of 2019. I was then offered a scholarship to study Chinese in Taiwan, which I of course accepted, and spent 6 months in the amazing city that is Taipei. If you've never been to Taiwan or never even thought about it as a travel destination, I wholeheartedly encourage you all to visit. Due to the pandemic, I returned to the UK in the middle of 2020 and finally moved back to Japan as a research student in June 2021. So, to answer Svetau's question, I've lived in the UK for about 23 years in total, as well as Japan for 2.5 years and Taiwan for 6 months, which I think makes me 26 years old. The next question comes from Instagram user Rogdobi. Have you ever thought about making a podcast in Japanese? I think you can speak the language, right? So I guess there are two questions here. Can I speak Japanese? Well, yes, I can. I'm not completely fluent, and there's so many things I need to improve on and practice. But I can get by with most daily tasks in Japan, and I can have conversations. I also speak a little Chinese, but definitely do not test me on that. I need to study a lot more. Would I ever consider doing a podcast in Japanese? Well, not on Thinking in English. This is for all English learners, and I will just use English in my episodes. But would I be a guest on a Japanese language podcast? Well, maybe. I've actually already appeared on a popular Japanese podcast run by two friends of mine, and I'd consider it again in the future. Next, we have a question from Celine Chang. Have you ever felt like you're not good enough as a teacher? Asked by a rookie teacher. Well, of course, I felt like I'm not good enough. I actually think I'm not a good teacher. There is a thing called imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is when you doubt your abilities and you feel like a fraud. You question your ability and whether you really belong somewhere. I've definitely felt this before, not just in teaching, but in everything, in studying, in all the time. I would say that I'm probably not the best English teacher. In fact, I've not worked as a full time English teacher since 2018. Right now, I make this podcast and I tutor part time online. I have decided to focus on what I'm best at, teaching upper intermediate and advanced discussion classes, conversation practice, and challenging students to reach the best of their abilities. I spent years teaching elementary school children and beginners classes, but I found that I'm best with more advanced students or children. I'm quite good at teaching children as well. I'm not particularly good at teaching beginners adults. I guess the best demonstration that you're not a bad teacher or a bad tutor, and maybe this applies to all jobs, that you're not bad at your job, is if people keep coming back to your classes and they tell you that they enjoy your lessons. I've been teaching many of the same students online multiple times a week for over a year now. So I must be doing something right. I do still have the feeling that I'm not good enough, but you have to think about the evidence. Do your students like your classes? Do they come back for more? Are you focusing on what you are best at? And I think this is good advice for every job and every, even hobbies, everything you do. We might not feel like we're very good at what we do, but if other people are telling you that you are good, if other people are telling you that they like your style and they enjoy from my case, they enjoy my classes, well, then I guess I should trust other people more than I should trust myself. Instagram user Zombie Nov asked if I could explain to you all words like bloke, mate, guy, folks, etc. Well, there are actually loads more words similar to this. I can add lad, chap, dude, boys, buddy. They are all terms to refer to people, especially males and your friends. All of these terms are also informal slang. Let me give you a few examples. Who is that bloke over there? Means who is that man over there? Hey guys is the same as saying hey everyone. And things like mate, buddy, dude, they are often used when you want to be friendly with someone in an informal way, but maybe you forgot their name or you don't want to keep using their name. An important thing to note is regional and dialectic differences. Mate, lad, chap, and bloke are commonly used in British English, while dude is much more common in American English. There are also differences depending on the age of people speaking, the gender, the social class, and the region they come from. From where I come in the UK, people use mate a lot. So when I used to get on the bus to school in the morning, I used to say cheers, mate, to the bus driver when I left the bus, which means thank you, bus driver. When I lived in Nottingham, people were more likely to say buddy, cheers, buddy. Next, we have a few requests for future episodes. Passenger 815 asked for episodes on the history of the UK. Now, this is definitely something I could do. I love history, and I would really like to record more historical episodes. In fact, my undergraduate major at university was in history. I wrote my dissertation on medicine, drugs, and mental health in colonial India. The history of the UK is long and complicated, ranging from ancient Celtic societies to the Roman period, Anglo-Saxons, the Viking and Norman invasions, through to Tudors, Stuarts, Elizabethans, and then the colonial period, Victorians, and the wars of the 20th century. Which parts of UK history would you like to learn about? Are there any other countries' histories you'd also like me to record episodes on? Simone Demeo underscore, I think that's right, also requested an episode. They asked, can you record a podcast episode about banning cigarettes for new generations in New Zealand? Well, here is some good news. Yes. Look out for an episode on New Zealand's cigarette ban and more general debate around this topic in early January. It was already on my list, and I kind of hoped to get it out before Christmas, but probably now I'll release it in the new year. The next request came from Paolo Federico Vencia. I probably also said that wrong, sorry. Could you tell us about the case of Patrick Zaki and why the Egyptian government implements such restrictive policies? Now, this is why I love getting suggestions from all of you. I would never have thought about creating an episode on this kind of topic. Most of the news and information I read about tends to be, about the UK and also about Asia. But now I'll definitely take a look at this topic and see if I can understand it well enough to write an episode. If anyone ever has a topic or issue they are interested in, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram and give me your suggestions. What are your future plans for the podcast? This final question came from Spotify, so it's actually anonymous. I don't know who asked it. But over the last few months, I've received a few similar questions. I have a lot of different plans for the podcast, but they really all depend on you as the listener. In the next few months, my plans are just to keep growing and keep getting new listeners. The more you share my content, the easier this is. I hope to get 10,000 average listeners per episode next year, which would make me one of the top language podcasts in the world. I think I'm going to start reviewing books exclusively on thinkinginenglishpod and also rating them on how difficult they are for English learners. It's because reading is such an important skill for you all to learn. Well, I guess you can already read, but for you all to practice and to develop your vocabulary. I'm also interested in making more Instagram content and maybe even branching out onto YouTube or other media. Basically, I would love to make this my job in the future, but right now I don't make any money from doing this. I'm planning on maybe introducing a subscription model in the new year. So perhaps I will release 2 episodes per week for free, and the third episode will only be available to people who subscribe to my blog. I'm still undecided, but maybe, $1 a month isn't too much for 4 episodes a month. It would be great to earn a little money from this podcast, as I could afford to buy a new microphone and pay for a better blog website. I'm currently using a cheap Chinese microphone that makes my voice sound, I guess, quite different to what it really sounds. But when I looked at the price of the good microphones, the Blue Yeti microphones or Rode Podcaster microphones, they're nearly $200. So I don't have enough money for that. If you'd be interested in subscribing for an extra episode a week, um, would you do it? I'll ask this as the Spotify question for today's episode. However, ultimately, I want to make the content that you want to listen to. So, what do you, as a listener and an English learner, want the future of this podcast to be? What type of episodes do you like? What could I improve on? Let me know. Reach out to me by email or on Instagram DMs. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a review or rating, recommend it to your friends, or let me know on Instagram. My Instagram is thinkinginenglishpod. The link should be in the description. And make sure you check out the Thinking in English blog. I love hearing from listeners, and I really appreciate all of the messages I have received over the past few months. Feel free to send me a message or give me some advice or recommend a topic. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.